Laura Paker had always been someone who thrived on adventure. As a photographer, she'd spent years traveling to remote corners of the world, capturing moments that most people could only dream of seeing. But all of that changed 5 years ago. A car accident robbed her of her sight, and with it, the life she had built. The world became a different place, one of shadows and sounds rather than light and color. Yet Laura refused to give up. She rebuilt her life piece by piece, learning how to navigate the darkness. At the center of this new chapter was Brooke, her loyal guide dog and constant companion. To Laura, Brooke wasn't just a guide. He was her protector, her confidant, and her steadfast rock. Every morning, Laura and Brooke followed the same routine. By late afternoon, they'd make their way to the central park of their small town, a haven for Laura in the midst of her daily challenges. The park was her sanctuary, a place where she could relax and feel the world around her in ways that went beyond sight. She'd sit on a weathered wooden bench beneath the sprawling branches of a maple tree, her face tilted toward the breeze as she listened to the symphony of life around her. The chirping of birds, the laughter of children playing nearby, and the rustle of leaves in the wind were comforting reminders that beauty existed even in the unseen. At her side, Brooke sat patiently, his leash loosely wrapped around her hand. His sleek black and tan coat shone in the golden sunlight filtering through the trees, and his sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the surroundings. Brooke was always alert, always aware, even in these peaceful moments. His ears twitched at the faintest sound, a jogger's footfall on the gravel path, the squeak of a bicycle, or the bark of another dog in the distance. Laura could feel his tension when something caught his attention. Though he remained calm, she always knew when he was on edge. For Laura, Brooke's presence was more than just reassuring. It was empowering. When she walked through the park, people often paused to admire the duo. There was something about the way Laura carried herself with quiet determination, and the way Brooke walked beside her, perfectly in sync, that inspired a sense of awe. Strangers often commented on how disciplined and well-trained Brooke was, but what they couldn't see was the bond they shared. It was unspoken yet deeply felt, a connection built on trust and loyalty. One particular afternoon, as Laura settled into her usual spot, she felt the slight pull of Brooke's leash. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, reaching down to brush her fingers against his fur. Brooke didn't respond with the usual wag of his tail. Instead, his body tensed, and a low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled in his chest. Laura frowned, her hand instinctively tightening around the leash. "Calm down," she said softly, though unease pricked at the edges of her thoughts. She couldn't see what had caught his attention, but she trusted his instincts implicitly. The park was busy that day, with families picnicking on the grass and couples strolling hand in hand. Yet, in the midst of this lively scene, there was an unsettling tension that Laura couldn't quite place. She tried to shake the feeling, focusing instead on the familiar sounds that usually brought her comfort. But Brooke wouldn't relax. His ears flicked back and forth, his eyes darting toward the path ahead. Laura could feel the shift in his demeanor, and her heart began to race. Something wasn't right. What Laura didn't know was that across the park, Martin Hayes had been watching her. Martin, with his imposing frame, shaved head, and tattooed arms, leaned casually against a tree, surrounded by a small group of equally rough-looking companions. To most people, Martin's presence was enough to send them walking in the opposite direction. His cold, calculating gaze landed on Laura and Brooke, and something about their peaceful coexistence seemed to irritate him. He flicked the end of his cigarette to the ground, a smirk curling across his lips. "Look at her," he muttered to one of his friends, his voice laced with derision. "Blind as a bat, and her little mutt thinks he's a guard dog." For Laura, the park had always been a safe haven, a place where she could feel grounded despite her challenges. But that afternoon, as Martin began to make his way toward her, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel path, the sanctuary she cherished was about to become the setting for an encounter that would change everything. Bruck, ever vigilant, braced himself, his low growl growing louder with each step Martin took. The tension in the air was palpable, and for Laura, the world that had become her refuge was now filled with an unmistakable sense of danger. Laura Paker sat on her favorite bench in Central Park, her fingers brushing gently against the worn wooden slats as she listened to the hum of life around her. The late afternoon sun filtered through the branches of the maple tree above, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Bruck, her loyal guide dog, sat alert by her side, his sharp eyes scanning the park for any potential threat. Though Laura couldn't see, she could feel the subtle vibrations in Bruck's leash, a quiet tension that told her he was on edge. Something about today felt different, though she couldn't quite place it. "Easy, boy," Laura murmured, reaching down to stroke his fur. The contact usually soothed him, but this time Bruck didn't relax. His body remained taut, his ears flicking back and forth as if trying to decipher a distant, unseen sound. Laura felt her own heartbeat quicken in response to his unease. Bruck was rarely wrong. Over the years, he had become her protector in more ways than one. His instincts were sharp, honed by a past she was only beginning to uncover, and when he sensed danger, Laura knew to trust him implicitly. Across the park, Martin Hayes leaned against the trunk of a tree, his broad shoulders hunched as he observed Laura from afar. With his shaved head, weathered leather jacket, and tattoos snaking up his arms, Martin's presence alone was enough to make most passers-by keep their distance. But he wasn't interested in the families picnicking nearby or the joggers weaving through the pathways. No. His attention was fixed solely on Laura and the dog sitting protectively by her side. "Look at her," Martin muttered, his voice low but dripping with disdain. His small group of friends, equally rough in appearance, turned their attention toward Laura as well. "Blind and clueless, and her mutt thinks he's a soldier or something." He flicked the end of his cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his boot with deliberate force. The smirk that spread across his face was predatory, tinged with an almost juvenile desire to provoke. "Let's see how tough they really are." His heavy boots thudded against the gravel path as he started toward Laura, the smirk on his face growing wider with every step. The laughter of children and the rustling of leaves faded into the background as Martin's shadow stretched across the ground. For him, this was nothing more than a game, a way to pass the time and assert his dominance. But for Bruck, it was a threat. Laura felt it immediately, the change in Bruck's posture as his body stiffened, his growl deepening into a low, menacing rumble. Her grip on the leash tightened instinctively, her pulse quickening. "Bruck, what is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to betray her growing unease. She tilted her head toward the sound of approaching footsteps, her other senses straining to fill in the gaps her eyes could no longer provide. "Hey there," a mocking voice drawled. Martin's tone was casual, almost friendly, but the malice lurking beneath it was unmistakable. "That's a nice dog you've got there. Does he do tricks?" He clapped his hands loudly, the sharp sound slicing through the air like a blade. "Come on, girl. Let's see if he can roll over." Laura's breath hitched, her fingers curling tightly around Bruck's leash. "Leave us alone," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. She couldn't see him, but she could feel the weight of his presence, his confidence, his arrogance, his desire to intimidate. But Martin wasn't deterred. If anything, her defiance seemed to amuse him. He took another step closer, the scent of cigarette smoke lingering in his wake. "Oh, come on. I'm just having a little fun," he sneered, his tone turning sharper. His eyes flicked to Bruck, whose growl had grown louder, more insistent. "What's the matter, boy? You don't like me?" The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Laura could hear murmurs from the growing crowd of onlookers, people stopping in their tracks to watch the unfolding scene but unwilling to step in. Some had their phones out, recording the encounter, while others whispered nervously among themselves. Brooke, however, remained unflinching. His body was coiled like a spring, his piercing gaze locked onto Martin with an intensity that made the man hesitate, if only for a fraction of a second. But Martin quickly shook off the momentary unease, his bravado returning as he raised his foot, feigning a kick toward Brooke. "Don't you dare!" Laura's voice cracked with desperation, her hands trembling as she gripped the leash tightly. She couldn't see what was happening, but she could feel the electric charge in the air, the palpable sense that something was about to snap. Martin laughed, the sound echoing across the park. "What's the big deal? He's just a dog," he jeered, taking another threatening step forward. But what Martin didn't know, what no one in the crowd knew, was that Brooke wasn't just any dog. Before becoming Laura's guide, he had served as a K-9 military dog, trained to handle threats far greater than a petty bully in a park. And now, those instincts were surging to the surface. Brooke barked, a sharp, commanding sound that sent a ripple through the crowd. The bark wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. In one fluid motion, Brooke moved to position himself squarely between Laura and Martin, his sharp teeth bared and his growl deepening into something primal. The park fell silent, the tension reaching its breaking point as all eyes turned to the showdown unfolding before them. For the first time, Martin hesitated. His smirk faltered as he stared down at the dog that was clearly more than he'd bargained for. "What the hell's his problem?" he muttered, his voice losing its edge. But Brooke didn't waver. His focus was unrelenting, his body a wall of determination and discipline. He was ready to defend Laura, no matter the cost. And in that moment, Laura, though blind to the scene before her, felt the full weight of Brooke's loyalty. The tension in the park began to dissolve as Martin Hayes retreated under the scornful gaze of bystanders and the park ranger, Chuck. His swagger had crumbled, replaced by a hasty exit, leaving Laura and Brooke standing in the center of an awkwardly quiet crowd. Laura could feel the loosened tension in Brooke's leash, his protective stance still unwavering. Though the immediate danger had passed, the moment lingered in the air like a distant echo of thunder after a storm. "Is everyone okay?" Chuck asked, his voice calm but firm. His eyes landed on Laura, then shifted to Brooke, whose gaze was still locked on the direction Martin had gone. Laura nodded, though her grip on the leash remained tight. "Yes, we're fine." "Thanks to Brooke," she said softly, reaching down to pat the dog's head. She felt his rigid muscles slowly relax under her touch, though the occasional twitch of his ears told her he was still on high alert. From behind the crowd, an older man wearing a faded military cap stepped forward, his weathered face etched with curiosity and recognition. "That's no ordinary dog," he said, his deep, gravelly voice cutting through the murmurs of the remaining onlookers. Laura turned her head toward the voice, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice cautious but tinged with intrigue. The man took a step closer, his eyes fixed on Brooke with a mixture of admiration and respect. "I know that stance anywhere," he said, gesturing toward the dog. "That's a K-9, a military dog. I've seen enough of them to recognize the training, the way he moved, the way he handled that scumbag. It's instinct. Dogs like him don't forget." Laura's breath caught in her throat. "A military dog?" she repeated, her hand instinctively tightening around Brooke's leash. The words sounded foreign to her, almost impossible. Brooke had always been extraordinary, but she had never considered the possibility that his past might hold such depth. The man nodded solemnly. "It's in his posture, his focus. He was protecting you the way he was trained to protect soldiers. That's not something any dog can do." The weight of his words settled heavily on Laura's mind. She crouched down beside Brooke, running her fingers through his thick fur as if seeing him for the first time. "Brooke," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is that true? Is that who you were before we met?" Brooke didn't respond, of course, but the quiet strength in his presence felt suddenly monumental. The crowd began to disperse, some people whispering in awe, others lingering to take one last glance at the dog that had held his ground against a bully. The man in the military cap remained for a moment longer, his gaze steady. "You should look into his history," he said. "Dogs like him carry a story worth knowing." That night, Laura couldn't sleep. The man's words replayed in her mind, each one filling in a gap she hadn't known existed. Sitting on the floor next to Brooke, she leaned against the couch, her laptop resting on her knees. The glow of the screen illuminated her face as she hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. What would she even search for? Where would she begin? Finally, she typed the words, "Military K-9 History." The search results were overwhelming. Stories of dogs that had saved lives, detected explosives, and endured combat alongside their handlers. Each article painted a picture of courage and loyalty that felt eerily familiar. The more Laura read, the more convinced she became that the man in the park had been right. Brooke's disciplined nature, his hyper-awareness, his ability to assess threats, it all fit. After hours of scrolling, she stumbled upon a resource for retired military dogs and their handlers. A phone number flashed on the screen, accompanied by a simple message: "Reconnecting K-9s with their past." Laura hesitated for only a moment before dialing. The voice on the other end was warm and professional. "Veterans K-9. Network, how can I help you?" Laura explained the incident in the park and what the older man had said. She described Brooke in detail, his temperament, his behavior, and the protective instincts he had displayed. The woman listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Do you know if he was chipped?" the woman asked. "Yes," Laura replied. "When I got him as a guide dog, they mentioned he had an ID chip." "That's perfect," the woman said. "If you can provide the number, I can look up his records and see if there's any match with our database." The next day, Laura took Brooke to the local vet to have his chip scanned. As she waited for the results, she felt a nervous energy bubbling inside her. What if the man had been mistaken? What if Brooke's past was something entirely different? But deep down, she already knew. She had always known there was something exceptional about him. When the phone call came later that afternoon, Laura's heart raced as the woman on the other end confirmed her suspicions. "Your dog's ID matches a retired K-9 named Bravo," she said. "He served overseas with Sergeant Jimmy Carter on multiple missions before retiring. Would you like his contact information?" The name Bravo echoed in Laura's mind, heavy with meaning. "Yes, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She scribbled down the details and stared at the paper in her hands for a long moment after the call ended. Turning to Brooke, no, Bravo. She crouched down beside him, her hands trembling as they brushed through his fur. "You've been through so much, haven't you?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea who you really were." Brooke leaned into her touch, his eyes calm yet watchful. In that moment, Laura realized that the bond they shared was more profound than she had ever imagined. Bravo wasn't just her guide. He was a guardian, a warrior, and a piece of a story she was only beginning to understand. Laura sat nervously on the edge of her couch, the piece of paper with Sergeant Jimmy Carter's contact information trembling in her hand. The name Bravo still echoed in her mind, a name that now carried the weight of a past she hadn't known existed. She glanced at Brooke, who lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws. He was calm as always, his presence steadying her even when her thoughts raced. "What do you think, Brooke?" she whispered, running her fingers gently through his fur. "Should I call him? Should I find out who you were before you were mine?" Brooke didn't respond, of course, but the way his ears twitched at her voice gave her the courage she needed. Taking a deep breath, Laura dialed the number and held her phone tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. The line rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Hello?" Laura's voice wavered as she introduced herself. "Hi, is this Sergeant Jimmy Carter? My name is Laura Paker, and I think I have your former K-9 partner, Bravo." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, so long that Laura wondered if the call had been disconnected. But when Jimmy finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Bravo? Are you serious? I thought I'd never hear anything about him again." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she listened to the raw vulnerability in his tone. "He's been with me for a few years now," she said softly. "I didn't know about his past until recently, but he saved my life, Sergeant. He's more than I could have ever hoped for." Jimmy let out a shaky breath. "He saved mine too, more times than I can count. I need to see him." The conversation ended with plans for Jimmy to fly out to meet Bravo. As the days passed, Laura found herself both excited and apprehensive. What would this reunion mean for Brooke? No, Bravo. Would he still see her as his partner, or would his bond with Jimmy overshadow everything they had built together? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on preparing for the emotional day ahead. The afternoon of Jimmy's arrival was warm and sunny, the kind of day Laura would normally spend in the park with Bravo. But today, she stood outside her small apartment, gripping Bravo's leash as they waited. She could feel the subtle tremor in the leash, a sign that Bravo sensed something unusual. "It's going to be okay," she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring him or herself. A car pulled up, and Laura heard the door slam shut. "Laura?" a deep voice called out, filled with a mix of excitement and hesitation. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "I'm Laura, and this—" She gestured toward Bravo, her voice catching slightly. "This is Bravo." At the sound of his old name, Bravo's ears perked up. Jimmy froze for a moment, his breath hitching as he took in the sight of the dog who had once been his partner. Slowly, he crouched down and extended a hand. "Hey there, boy," he said softly, his voice trembling. "Do you remember me?" The silence that followed was electric. Laura held her breath as she felt the tension in Bravo's leash. For a moment, he didn't move, his body stiff as his eyes locked onto Jimmy. Then, as if something deep within him clicked into place, Bravo took a cautious step forward. He sniffed Jimmy's outstretched hand, and then the shift came, a wag of his tail, a low, whimpering sound that spoke volumes. Jimmy's eyes filled with tears as he reached out to gently stroke Bravo's head. "You remember?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You still remember?" Laura stood silently, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the reunion. The connection between Bravo and Jimmy was undeniable, a bond forged in the heat of danger and trust that had never truly been broken. Yet as she listened to Jimmy murmur softly to Bravo, she didn't feel excluded. Instead, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the history that had shaped the dog who had become her lifeline. Inside the apartment, Jimmy shared stories of their time together in the military. "Bravo wasn't just a dog," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "He was my partner, my protector. He saved me more times than I can count, detecting explosives, standing guard in the dead of night, even pulling me out of a firefight once. He was fearless, but more than that, he was loyal. He'd have given his life for me." Laura listened intently, her hand resting on Bravo's back as Jimmy spoke. Each story painted a picture of a dog who had faced unimaginable challenges, whose courage and discipline had saved lives. It was humbling, and it deepened her appreciation for the quiet strength Bravo carried even now. As the day came to a close, Jimmy knelt beside Bravo one last time. "You've got a good life now, boy," he said, his voice trembling. "I couldn't have asked for a better person to take care of you." Laura felt her chest tighten at his words. "Thank you for trusting me with him," she said softly, her voice laced with emotion. Jimmy gave her a small, bittersweet smile. "He's in the right place." As Jimmy walked away, Laura knelt beside Bravo, wrapping her arms around him. "You've been through so much," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But no matter where you've been or what you've done, you're home now." Bravo leaned into her embrace, his warm presence grounding her in the moment. For Laura, the reunion had been more than just a glimpse into Bravo's past. It had been a reminder of the resilience, loyalty, and love that defined him. And as she sat there with him, she knew one thing for certain. Their bond was unshakable, forged not just by circumstance, but by choice. The weeks following Sergeant Jimmy Carter's visit were filled with reflection for Laura. The reunion had been an emotional revelation, offering her a deeper understanding of who Bravo, truly was. It was humbling to realize that the dog who had guided her through her darkest days had once been a hero on a battlefield. As she stroked Bravo's fur that evening, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her small apartment, she couldn't help but wonder, was she giving him the life he deserved? Bravo lay peacefully at her feet, his breathing steady, but Laura's thoughts were anything but calm. Jimmy's words echoed in her mind. Bravo was fearless, always protecting those he cared about. That's his purpose. The thought stirred something deep within her. She knew Bravo was happy to guide her, but what if he longed for the kind of fulfillment that came from his old life? What if she was holding him back from experiencing the joy he found in purpose-driven work? The next day, Laura found herself scrolling through articles and forums about retired K9 dogs. She read story after story of how these dogs thrived when they were given opportunities to engage in activities that mirrored their training, tracking scents, navigating obstacle courses, protecting those in need. It was clear that these dogs carried their instincts and discipline with them, even after leaving the battlefield. The more she read, the more she realized that Bravo wasn't just guiding her, he was still protecting her, still carrying out his mission in his own quiet way. One article stood out to her. It described a training facility specifically designed for retired canines, a place where they could channel their skills into new activities. Her heart raced as she called the number listed, explaining Bravo's story to the woman on the other end of the line. The woman's enthusiasm was immediate. "We'd love to have him evaluated," she said. "Dogs like Bravo don't lose their drive. They just need an outlet. I think he'll thrive here." The following Saturday, Laura and Bravo arrived at the facility. It was a sprawling property with open fields, agility courses, and a small group of handlers working with their K9 partners. Bravo's ears perked up the moment they stepped through the gate, his posture straightening as if he instinctively knew this was a place meant for him. Laura could feel the excitement vibrating through his leash. For a dog who had spent years guiding her with calm precision, this was a side of Bravo she hadn't seen before. A trainer approached, her eyes lighting up as she crouched to greet Bravo. "This must be Bravo," she said warmly, offering him a treat. "Let's see what he remembers." As Bravo was guided through a series of tasks, tracking scents, navigating obstacles, and responding to commands, Laura watched from a nearby bench, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and bittersweet emotion. He moved with a confidence and energy she hadn't realized he still carried, completing each task with the precision of a dog still in his prime. It was like watching a part of him come alive, a piece of his identity that had been dormant, but never forgotten. When the trainer returned with Bravo, her face was glowing with admiration. "He's incredible," she said. "It's like he never left the field. You've got a special one here." Laura smiled, though her chest felt tight. She knew Bravo had loved the session, but it raised a new question. Was she enough for him? Could she truly fulfill him, knowing the life he had once lived? That evening, back at home, Laura knelt beside Bravo and stroked his fur. "You were amazing today," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never want you to lose that part of yourself, Bravo. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out together." Bravo leaned into her touch, his steady presence grounding her. For the first time, she truly understood what Jimmy had meant when he said, "Bravo doesn't live in the past. He lives for his people. And right now, Laura, you're his mission." Those words stayed with her in the weeks that followed. Every Saturday, she and Bravo returned to the training facility, where he thrived in the structured activities that mirrored his K9 training. Watching him excel filled Laura with pride, but it also deepened her appreciation for the quiet balance they had struck together. Bravo wasn't just her guide. He was her partner, her protector, and her friend. And she realized that their bond wasn't about replacing his past. It was about building a future where both of them could find purpose. One afternoon, after a particularly successful session, the trainer pulled Laura aside. "Bravo is exceptional," she said. "He's not just a retired K9, he's one of the best I've ever seen. But I want to remind you of something. For dogs like him, happiness doesn't come from what they do, it comes from who they do it for. You're a part of his purpose, Laura. Never forget that." Those words resonated deeply as Laura and Bravo walked home that day. She thought about everything he had given her, his guidance, his protection, his unwavering loyalty. In turn, she had given him a safe and loving home, a place where he could continue to fulfill his purpose. Their partnership was mutual, built on trust and love, and it was a bond she would never take for granted. Sitting on her couch that evening, Laura looked down at Bravo, who rested peacefully at her feet. "You've never stopped being a hero, have you?" she whispered, her voice filled with affection. "Even now, you're still protecting me, still looking out for me. And I promise, I'll always do the same for you." Bravo's ears twitched at her voice, and he lifted his head to look at her. In his eyes, Laura saw the unwavering loyalty that had defined his past and shaped their present. For Laura, there was no greater privilege than walking through life with a partner as extraordinary as Bravo, a dog who had been a warrior, a guide, and above all, her unwavering friend. Weeks turned into months, and Laura Paker found herself settling into a new rhythm of life with Bravo. Their days had shifted from simply navigating the challenges of her blindness to embracing a life filled with mutual purpose. The training sessions at the K9 facility had become a weekly ritual, a time when Bravo could thrive in an environment that awakened his instincts and skills. For Laura, watching him move with precision and confidence during these sessions was both humbling and heartwarming. It reminded her of the incredible depth of his past and the strength of his spirit, qualities that now infused her own life with meaning. Yet it was during their quiet moments at home or on their familiar walks in the park that Laura truly felt the weight of the journey they had shared. Bravo wasn't just a dog who had protected her from harm or guided her through the world. He had transformed her perspective on life. Through his unwavering loyalty, Laura had learned that strength wasn't about overcoming challenges alone. It was about leaning on others, trusting them, and allowing that bond to inspire growth. One crisp autumn afternoon, Laura and Bravo returned to the park where their journey had shifted so profoundly months earlier. The memory of that confrontation with Martin Hayes lingered, but it no longer carried the sharp sting of fear. Instead, it felt like a turning point, a moment that had unveiled the layers of Bravo's story and deepened their bond. Laura settled onto her usual bench, the cool breeze brushing against her face, as she tilted her head toward the sounds of the park. "Do you remember this place, Bravo?" she asked softly, her hand resting on his head. "This is where I first realized just how incredible you are." Bravo sat beside her, calm and alert as always, his eyes scanning the park. Laura could feel the quiet strength radiating from him, a reminder that he was always ready to protect her. But she also knew that protecting her wasn't his only purpose. It was a shared one. Together, they had created a partnership that was about more than survival. It was about thriving. As the breeze carried the laughter of children and the rustling of leaves, Laura reflected on how much her life had changed since Bravo had come into it. Before the accident, she had been fiercely independent, traveling the world as a photographer and living on her own terms. Losing her sight had forced her to confront vulnerabilities she had never imagined, but it was Bravo who had taught her that leaning on someone else didn't make her weak. It made her stronger. She smiled as she spoke to him again, her voice steady. "You've given me so much, Bravo. You've been my eyes, my protector, my friend, and I've realized something. I don't just rely on you. I learn from you. You've taught me what it means to trust, to persevere, and to keep moving forward no matter what." As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the branches above, Laura's thoughts turned to the lessons Bravo's journey had taught her about herself. His life as a K9 military dog had been defined by discipline, loyalty, and courage. But even after leaving that life behind, he had found a way to continue fulfilling his purpose. In many ways, he had mirrored her own journey. She had once been defined by her career and independence, but losing those things hadn't meant losing her value. It had simply meant finding new ways to live with purpose. The realization brought tears to her eyes, though they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, for Bravo, for the journey they had shared, and for the strength they had found in one another. In Bravo, Laura had discovered not just a guide, but a partner who had shown her that life's challenges were not the end of the story. They were simply opportunities to grow, to adapt, and to create something even more meaningful. That evening, as Laura sat with Bravo in their small living room, she ran her fingers gently through his fur, her voice soft but resolute. "You've never stopped being a hero, Bravo, and you've shown me how to be brave in ways I never thought I could. Together, we've built something beautiful, a life where we both have purpose." Bravo leaned into her touch, his calm presence a steady reassurance that they were exactly where they were meant to be. For Laura, the lesson was clear. Life's greatest challenges often lead to its most profound connections, and with Bravo by her side, she knew she could face anything. The story of Laura and Bravo was one of resilience, trust, and mutual growth. It was a reminder that even in the face of loss and adversity, there is a path forward, a path illuminated by the bonds we form and the lessons we learn from those who walk it with us. Bravo's journey from a warrior on the battlefield to a guide and protector in Laura's life was not just a testament to his courage. It was a testament to the transformative power of love, loyalty, and purpose. Together, they had turned hardship into strength, creating a life that was not only meaningful but deeply inspiring. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.